Alright guys, welcome to day 5. This is going to be one of the most important videos that you definitely need to pay attention to. We are going to be tying a few of the things that we've already discussed together, and we're going to be finding out the draw on liquidity. This video is solely going to be on how you guys can identify the draw on liquidity. So let's get right into it. The draw on liquidity is very simple. The concept is, where was liquidity taken last and where is price likely to draw to next, right? Which is going to be essentially the draw on liquidity, right? Because price moves from one liquidity level to another, whether that's internal and external, which is something we'll get into later on in this course, and highs and lows, right? So that's what we're going to be focusing on here, essentially just tying together the structure of videos and finding a bias, whether that's short-term or mid-term or long-term. So we're going to get right into an example here. You guys can see that we have this big gap lower, right? And this green level here signifies a daily key level, okay? So this is where like price is most likely to reverse. I already have this level pre-marked out because this is where we expect price to get a reversal, right? And then obviously we want to mark out this new weekly opening gap, right? Right there. And I'm going to mark this with, this is essentially going to be your NWOG, right? So we'll mark that out just so we know that this is the new weekly opening gap. And this is where price is currently most likely to draw to, right? If we are to be bearish, then we would obviously want to see displacement below this key level, right? If we see displacement below that key level, then obviously we go ahead and we just target this low right here, and it becomes pretty easy. But right now, I have a bullish bias just based off of the fact that we hit this daily key level and the fact that price might reverse here considering it does not displace. Okay, so what I want to see is, do we get the displacement lower or do we start to slowly make a move higher? Okay. Now, as you can see, we obviously do not have any displacement lower at all. Price starts to make a move higher. So right now, we are going to be looking for this new weekly opening gap as our current draw on liquidity. As soon as this previous candle here forms, and you see that we do not have any displacement, this is where now you're effectively going to start looking for longs because that draw on liquidity is clearly higher. So price makes this move up into this new weekly opening gap. That is the upside draw on liquidity, right? Pushes into the gap and it is currently hit, right? Now, once price pushes into this draw on liquidity, we're going to leave several levels behind, right? Obviously, you guys can see we leave this particular fair value gap right here, and this is going to be our next draw. The first draw was that new weekly opening gap, okay? Now, after that draw, considering price is going to pull back into a PD array before it continues higher, this is where we would be looking for price to go, right? So we would be looking for price to come down into this fair value gap, and then we would see, do we get displacement through the gap, right? If we get displacement through the gap, then we are starting to look for these lows, right? These lows would become our draw. But if it bounces from this gap, then the upside would become our draw. And so we'll see that in just a second. Let's see if price makes a move down into this gap. All right, there we go. We've made a move down into the gap. Now, so far, we do not have any displacement here. Price actually is wicking out of this fair value gap. So what does that tell me? That tells me that price is very strong and we have a upside draw into this high and then this high, right? The way that's determined, again, is going to be displacement versus a liquidity sweep. So let's see what price does here. Again, you guys can see no displacement lower and we start making a really nice move higher up here, okay? There's your first draw on liquidity level hit. Again, we want to see, does this displace or does it slow down? We've also created a new fair value gap right here as well. So currently it's slowed down a little bit. Because it is this slow, our draw becomes this fair value gap, right? And then again, same as back here, all we're trying to do is we're trying to see, does price displace through here, or do we start making a move out of this area? So here you go. Here's that fair value gap getting hit, right? Again, we do not have any displacement out of inside of this area just yet. In fact, we start to make this move higher, right? That leaves us with that level up there. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to remove this just because this level got hit. This becomes our new draw on liquidity, right? Keep in mind, like you guys see, all these draws that we have is based on how price is reacting to certain areas of liquidity. If price is respecting this internal level, then that means we are going to push to this external level. And then the way we react to this external level is going to determine, do we pull back into an internal before we go back to external, or are we going to keep going higher? Okay, so let's see what it does here. And there you go, it reaches into the next draw on liquidity. Now all we want to do is we want to see, does it displace or does it slow down? Clearly we have a continued move higher, right? This is called displacement. So because it is moving the way it is, I would personally not expect price to come back into this fair value gap until and unless it slows down. So right now, the way price looks, I would be looking for a continued move higher into that upper draw. Again, you guys can see every single time it makes a new high, it starts displacing higher, right? There's no signs of this thing wanting to go lower just yet, so we still have a continued upside draw on liquidity. And all we want to do is we want to see, does that get hit? And as you can see, I went a little too far, but as you can see, that draw gets hit right there, right? So this was an easy read all the way from the bottom to the top. Right, now we still have, remember, we still have this 4-hour gap that is left open, and then we have this lower 4-hour gap here as well. So once we sweep these highs, right, and we are showing no displacement to the upside, because remember, we swept this, and there's no displacement. In fact, we sold off and closed down here. We are now looking for some lows. Where are the lows? I see this as a very viable draw on liquidity, and then, well, obviously we have these two fair value gaps, and then we have this as another viable draw on liquidity, right? So let's see what price does here. And the first draw on liquidity has been hit. We are now inside of this gap. The way we react to this gap is going to determine if we go lower into the sell side or do we bounce higher. So let's see how price closes here. And as you can see, it fully closes through this gap, right? So this gap is now invalid. We are now going to push down into this low, right? This is now our draw on liquidity. And then down here, we can decide what price will do once we get there. Okay, price has now hit that level, right? We have reversed from this draw on liquidity that we had down here. Where is our next draw? Very simple. Our draw is now going to be up here, right? So not only do we have that, but we also have this bearish gap, right? That gets hit almost instantly. So what we want to see is a reaction to this. Do we inverse or do we start selling off? So as you can see, let me backtrack a little bit. As you can see, we fully inverse this gap, right? So now this makes our draw higher, right? So we want to see, do we leave anything here inside of this range for us to use? And what do you know? We have this bullish gap here as well. So we've got not only just the inverse, but we also have this bullish gap here. And we would be looking for that to potentially get tested if this thing starts to slow down. As you can see, right there is what I was talking about. So we test this area, and then we expect a continued move higher, right? So let's see what happens here. Starting to slow down a little bit. And now we are starting to slowly get the bounce, right? So obviously we have two draws. We're going to have this high and then the upside high. Right, so this is what we would be looking for first, and then the upper one. But the draw is currently higher, continues to be higher, right? Let's see what happens. This is fresh, by the way. I have not went through this price action previously or anything like that. As you can see, we're still holding this inverse, so price is still going to continue pushing higher. Is the bias here, and it looks like we're at the end of the road. But this is currently live price action, And we are going to be basically looking for these two highs to get taken, right? This is our next draw on liquidity. And because this is live and this is going to get posted, you guys can go and check this a few days later, but we will have absolutely taken at the very least this high, right? And the way we react to this high, whether we displace or start selling off, is going to be a direct indication of, do we keep going higher, right? Now, as far as internal and external goes, it's going to clear up a lot in the video that we do in the IRL/ERL. So I don't want to go too deep into it, but this is a very, very basic concept of the draw on liquidity. Okay.